A shocking end to a story of love, betrayal, and murder. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Rohan Mehta's life seemed like a dream. Living in a modern London apartment with its large windows overlooking the bustling city, he had everything anyone could desire. A successful career in IT, a beautiful home and a wife, Anaya, who appeared loving and devoted. Two outsiders. Their relationship was perfect. Friends often commented on how lucky Rohan was to have such a charming wife, and colleagues admired the way he balanced his professional life with personal happiness. The apartment was tastefully decorated, with warm lights reflecting off polished surfaces, creating a welcoming environment. On weekends, the couple would stroll through the city streets, smile for photos, and attend social gatherings where they were always the center of attention. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form, and Rohan was the first to sense the subtle shifts. It started with small things that seemed insignificant at first. Anaya began spending more time on her phone, often stepping into another room to take calls. She would laugh at messages that she quickly hid when Rohan entered the room. Sometimes she would appear distracted while talking to him, her gaze wandering toward the window or the floor, as if her mind were elsewhere. These minor changes made Rohan uneasy, though he tried to convince himself it was stress from work or fatigue. He prided himself on being observant, and his instincts told him something was wrong, yet he had no proof, only a growing feeling of unease that refused to leave. The routine they once shared was slowly unraveling. Breakfasts that had been calm and cheerful turned silent, with Rohan stealing glances at Anaya, trying to read her expression. He noticed the way she would check her phone under the table, her fingers hovering over the screen as if hiding secrets. Even small gestures, like her quick departures from the room, or her sudden attentiveness to minor tasks around the apartment, began to feel calculated. It was as if she were preparing for something he was not supposed to see. The warmth that had defined their home was being replaced with a subtle tension, a quiet storm building beneath the surface. Despite the unease, Rohan continued his daily routine, masking his anxiety with smiles and casual conversation. He focused on his work, attended meetings, and maintained appearances with friends and neighbors. Yet at night, he would lie awake, analyzing every interaction, replaying every moment, and questioning every word Anaya had spoken. The sense that the life he had built was fragile grew stronger with each passing day. He wondered how much of their life had been genuine and how much had been carefully staged. The man who had believed he knew everything about his wife was beginning to realize that some truths could be cleverly hidden. As the days drew closer to Black Friday, the city buzzed with anticipation, but for Rohan, each passing hour heightened the tension within the apartment. He could feel that something significant was about to happen. The perfect life he had trusted and celebrated seemed increasingly like a delicate illusion, poised to shatter. What had once been a comforting home now felt like a stage for secrets, and Rohan sensed that the calm before the storm was about to end in a way he could never have imagined. Rohan could no longer ignore the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. Over the past few weeks, Anaya's behavior had grown increasingly secretive. The late-night texts, the whispered phone calls, and the way she would sometimes vanish from his sight without explanation all contributed to a gnawing sense of suspicion. At first, Rohan tried to rationalize it, blaming work stress, her desire for personal space, or even the pressures of maintaining appearances among friends. But deep down, he knew that these explanations did not fully account for the unease that had settled over him like a shadow. One evening, Rohan decided to observe her more closely. He watched from across the living room as she moved about, her attention constantly divided between him and her phone. The screen would light up, and she would quickly hide it behind her back, pretending to be checking a notification that did not exist. He noticed subtle changes in her voice, a slight hesitation when speaking, and fleeting expressions that seemed to vanish as quickly as they appeared. Every laugh felt forced, every smile slightly off. The familiarity he had once trusted seemed to be slipping away, replaced by an unpredictable and unfamiliar presence. The unease grew into a restless obsession. Rohan began keeping track of Anaya's movements, noting when she left the apartment and where she went. He started to notice patterns, small inconsistencies that hinted at deception. She would often step out for errands at odd hours or take longer than expected when meeting friends. Even mundane activities seemed to carry hidden significance, as if they were coded messages meant to hide something from him. The man who had once believed in transparency and trust now found himself constructing elaborate mental maps of her day, analyzing every step, every gesture, and every glance. The turning point came one night when Rohan caught a glimpse of a message that made his heart sink. Though he could not see the full content, the way she quickly minimized the screen and shifted her attention was enough to confirm his growing fears. The sense of betrayal was immediate and overwhelming. He felt a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief, a storm of emotions that left him restless and sleepless. The trust that had once formed the foundation of their life together was crumbling, replaced by doubt and suspicion that would not relent. Despite the growing tension, Rohan remained outwardly calm. He maintained the appearance of normalcy during the day, continuing his work and interacting with friends as if nothing were wrong. But at night, the apartment felt different, charged with a quiet tension that neither of them could ignore. Shadows seemed longer, silence heavier, and the simple act of sitting in the same room together felt loaded with unspoken questions. Each movement, each glance, and each sound became significant, a clue in a puzzle he was desperate to solve. As Black Friday approached, the unease in Rohan's mind intensified. The city outside was alive with activity, yet inside the apartment, the atmosphere was suffocating. He sensed that the moment of revelation was drawing near, that the truth he feared might finally be exposed. Every step Anaya took seemed calculated, every smile a mask, and Rohan realized that the perfect life he had once known was no longer within reach. The suspicion that had begun as a whisper had now grown into an undeniable certainty, and he could feel the tension building toward a confrontation that would change everything. The city was alive with chaos as Black Friday approached. Streets were filled with shoppers rushing from store to store, each person desperate to grab the best deals. Neon signs flashed relentlessly, and the noise of car horns, chatter, and distant music created a constant hum that seemed to echo through every corner of London. Rohan and Anaya walked among the crowd, but Rohan's mind was far from the frenzy surrounding him. He could barely focus on the stores or the flashing advertisements. Instead, he observed Anaya, noting every movement, every glance, and every hesitation. Something inside him warned that today might be the day when all hidden truths would surface. Anaya moved with a sense of purpose that was almost unnatural. She lingered near certain shops longer than necessary, occasionally checking her phone while glancing around to see if Rohan was watching. Each of these actions, subtle as they were, set Rohan's nerves on edge. He felt a strange mixture of fear, anticipation, and anger swelling within him. The festive atmosphere around them, with its bright lights and cheerful shoppers, contrasted sharply with the dark storm brewing in his mind. While the city celebrated Black Friday, Rohan was consumed by the sense that betrayal and revelation were lurking just around the corner. As they navigated through the crowded streets, Rohan noticed her slipping away at intervals. A glance at her phone, a sudden detour toward a different shop, a brief pause that seemed unnecessary. All of these small deviations triggered a silent alarm in his mind. He began to piece together a mental map of her movements, predicting where she would go next and who she might meet. The realization that Anaya had been hiding something for weeks now became undeniable. Each step she took seemed calculated, almost rehearsed, as if she were trying to maintain a carefully crafted illusion in the midst of chaos. Despite the noise and distractions of the city, Rohan felt completely alone in his thoughts. He was hyper-aware of every detail, the way her hair caught the sunlight as they walked past the shop windows, the slight hesitation in her step, the furtive glances toward people passing by. Each observation added fuel to the fire of suspicion building inside him. The tension between them was palpable, though they exchanged no words. It was a silent struggle, a battle of awareness and concealment, played out amid the bright chaos of Black Friday. By late afternoon, the streets were even more crowded, and the energy of the city had reached a fever pitch. Rohan's unease had transformed into a focused determination. He realized that he could no longer wait passively. The truth had to be uncovered. The sense of impending confrontation grew stronger with each passing hour. Every shopper, every neon sign, every rushing figure seemed to fade into the background as Rohan's mind zeroed in on Anaya's actions, searching for the proof he both feared and longed to find. As the sun began to set and the city lights reflected off wet pavements, Rohan sensed that the day of Black Friday, with all its noise, frenzy, and distraction, would soon reveal secrets that could no longer be contained. The perfect illusion of life he had trusted for so long was on the brink of shattering, and the tension in his chest was a warning. Tonight, everything would change, and the calm before the storm was about to end. The moment of truth arrived quietly, without warning, yet it carried the weight of weeks of suspicion. Rohan had been tracking Anaya's behavior for days, collecting clues, observing her every movement, and noting her increasingly secretive actions. The sense of unease that had grown inside him now crystallized into undeniable proof. It started with a glimpse of her phone when she left it briefly unattended on the kitchen counter. Hesitating for only a second, Rohan's eyes fell on a string of messages that made his heart pound. The exchanges were not casual. They were intimate, secret, and unmistakably evidence of betrayal. Every message, every photograph on that screen was like a dagger. Anaya had been seeing someone else, someone she had met through work, a man named Karan. The evidence was clear and shocking, far beyond what Rohan had feared. Images of their secret meetings, texts filled with flirtation and plans for encounters, and the careful concealment of every interaction confirmed what he had silently dreaded. The perfect life he had built was built on lies. The weight of this realization pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe, making the room feel smaller, darker, and suffocating. Rohan felt a storm of emotions surge inside him: anger, disbelief, and an aching sense of betrayal. Every memory of shared moments, smiles, and laughter suddenly felt tainted. The quiet dinners, the weekend outings, even her seemingly affectionate gestures were now seen through the lens of deceit. The trust he had placed in Anaya, the foundation of their life together, had been dismantled piece by piece in secret. The shock was accompanied by a growing, consuming rage, one that he struggled to control even as he sat silently in the kitchen, staring at the phone screen that held the undeniable truth. For hours he replayed every interaction, every seemingly small detail that now revealed itself as a clue. The late-night messages, the sudden errands, the nervous glances, they all aligned perfectly with the timeline of the affair. The man, Karan, was not just a colleague. He had infiltrated the life they had built together, quietly, deliberately, and effectively. Rohan felt a cold clarity, understanding that nothing could undo what had been done, and yet the desire to act grew stronger with every passing moment. The apartment, once a haven, felt like a trap filled with tension, the walls closing in as he considered what the revelation meant for the life he had known. Despite the storm raging within him, Rohan forced himself to remain calm outwardly. He understood that any sudden confrontation could escalate unpredictably, and he needed time to process, to plan, and to prepare. Each breath was measured, each movement careful, as he weighed his options and tried to contain the explosive emotions threatening to overwhelm him. The realization of Anaya's betrayal had shattered the fragile sense of security he had held onto for so long. By the time night fell, the city outside was quieting, but inside the apartment, tension had reached its peak. Rohan could no longer ignore the evidence, nor the emotions it stirred. The life he had trusted, the relationship he had cherished, and the future he had envisioned now seemed irreparably broken. The discovery of the hidden affair had changed everything, leaving him trapped in a turbulent mixture of sorrow, fury, and the irresistible need for answer. The quiet apartment echoed with a sense of impending confrontation, signaling that the moment when the truth could no longer be contained was fast approaching. Rohan's mind had become a labyrinth of plans, thoughts, and obsessions. The discovery of Anaya's betrayal had altered everything. The calm certainty of his life had been replaced with a tense vigilance. Every movement she made, every word she spoke, every glance she cast in his direction now carried enormous weight. He studied her silently, observing her routines, noting the timing of her calls, the routes she took, and the small habits that could give him an advantage. The apartment, once a place of comfort and warmth, had transformed into a room of strategy, a private arena where he would measure every possibility before deciding on the next move. The days leading up to Black Friday were filled with meticulous planning. Rohan analyzed every detail: the crowded streets, the busy stores, the flurry of shoppers that would serve as both cover and distraction. He knew that in such chaos, nothing would go unnoticed, and yet it was the perfect environment to act without drawing attention. Every step Anaya might take was mapped in his mind. He considered the possible reactions of neighbors, colleagues, and even strangers, weighing every potential outcome. The obsession with controlling the narrative grew stronger each day, merging with the growing, simmering rage he felt toward the betrayal. Rohan's thoughts were relentless. He imagined scenarios in which the affair could continue unchecked, each possibility fueling his desire for action. The city outside seemed oblivious to the private storm raging inside the apartment. Shoppers hurried past in waves, stores glowed with bright signage, and the hum of the city masked the tension that tightened his chest. In this contrast between public normalcy and private turmoil, Rohan found both clarity and dread. He understood that the life he had known, the love he had trusted, and the future he had envisioned were all suspended on a knife's edge, balanced precariously above a chasm of irreversible decision. As Black Friday approached, Rohan rehearsed his movements in his mind. He studied the layout of stores, the timing of street traffic, and the patterns of nearby pedestrians. Each observation added another layer to his plan. Even the smallest detail, an unattended alley, a dimly lit corridor, or a gap in the crowd, became crucial. The combination of careful observation and obsessive focus turned the apartment into a map of possibilities, each route and each potential encounter plotted in advance. Sleep became elusive as he obsessed over outcomes. Every shadow in the apartment seemed heavier, every creak in the floor louder. Rohan felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration, a dangerous cocktail of anticipation and determination. He was fully aware that his life could change forever in the coming hours, yet the pull to act was irresistible. Every nerve in his body was alert, every thought sharpened by the knowledge of what he had discovered and the certainty that nothing could restore the past. By the night before Black Friday, Rohan had resolved himself. His plan, refined through hours of observation and careful thought, was ready. The bustling city would provide both cover and distraction. The betrayal could no longer be ignored. Every detail, every moment, and every possible contingency had been calculated. The calm, rational exterior he displayed during the day masked the storm within, a storm that was poised to break with the arrival of the next day. The tension in the apartment, palpable and almost tangible, foretold that the perfect illusion of life was about to shatter, and nothing would ever be the same again. The day of Black Friday arrived with a chaotic energy that pulsed through the city. Streets overflowed with people, car horns blared incessantly, and shop doors opened and closed with a relentless rhythm. Rohan felt none of the festive excitement around him. His focus was entirely on the apartment, on Anaya, and on the storm that had been building inside him for weeks. Every step she took seemed deliberate, every glance calculated, and the tension between them had become almost unbearable. The vibrant city outside was a stark contrast to the dark turmoil within the walls of their home. By late afternoon, the simmering tension between them erupted. Anaya moved through the apartment with a mixture of nervousness and defiance, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Rohan's mind raced as he confronted the reality of her betrayal. Every text, every hidden photo, every secret meeting flashed vividly in his memory. The combination of hurt and anger coalesced into a dangerous clarity. He could no longer stand by, pretending that nothing had changed, pretending that their life was as it had once seemed. In a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly, the confrontation escalated. Words were unspoken, but their presence filled the room like a thick, heavy fog. The apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt like a battlefield. Objects that had been part of ordinary life, a chair, a lamp, a coffee cup, suddenly seemed to take on significance, witnesses to the tension that was spiraling toward a breaking point. Every heartbeat echoed loudly in Rohan's ears as he felt the culmination of weeks of suspicion, anger, and betrayal converge into an uncontrollable force. The argument, though silent, turned physical. A struggle began, subtle at first, then more desperate, as each action carried the weight of fear and regret. Rohan's emotions overwhelmed him, clouding rational thought. The air was thick with tension, the room heavy with the sense that something irreversible was about to occur. In an instant, the line between anger and action blurred, and a fatal decision was made. The apartment, filled with once ordinary objects, now bore the mark of a life-altering tragedy. After the moment passed, silence returned, but it was not peaceful. The apartment felt suffocating, the shadows longer and darker, and the quiet pierced the air with a sharp, unforgiving edge. Rohan's mind raced as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. The reality of his actions began to settle in, heavy and undeniable. There was no turning back, no way to undo the consequences that had unfolded in the span of a few tense moments. The betrayal, the anger and the lead nights of suspicion had led to this irrevocable act. Outside, the city carried on obliviously. Shoppers rushed past with bags in hand, the chaos of Black Friday continuing as though nothing had changed. Inside the apartment, however, the world had stopped. The calm facade of their perfect life had been destroyed, leaving only a room filled with tension, silence, and the haunting weight of a decision that could never be reversed. The day, once filled with mundane chaos, had transformed into a personal catastrophe, marking the beginning of a tragedy that would shake every foundation of trust and love. Rohan had known. The apartment that had once been a haven of comfort now smelled of fear and silence. Neighbors had noticed something unusual and called the authorities, setting in motion a series of events that Rohan could no longer control. Within minutes, the quiet apartment was transformed into a scene of investigation. Police officers moved with precision, their flashlights cutting through the dimly lit rooms, their eyes scanning every surface for evidence. Yellow crime tape cordoned off the area, creating a stark boundary between the normal world outside and the hidden turmoil inside. The hum of the city was muffled here, replaced by the deliberate, methodical sounds of an unfolding inquiry. Rohan had initially tried to maintain a calm facade, acting the part of a grieving husband. He stood near the edge of the apartment, his face carefully composed, his eyes betraying nothing. But the investigators were thorough. They examined the apartment with relentless attention to detail, noting every inconsistency. Forensic teams collected samples, photographed objects, and analyzed the scene for clues that could reveal the truth. What had appeared to be a tragic accident was slowly unraveling under the scrutiny of professionals trained to detect deception. The officers questioned every angle. Every object in the apartment was catalogued, every phone and electronic device inspected. Subtle signs of struggle, overlooked by Rohan in his panic, became glaring evidence under the keen eyes of investigators. Furniture that had been slightly moved, objects knocked over in the heat of the fatal encounter, and the faint traces of physical confrontation all painted a story that could not be ignored. Rohan's careful planning and attempts to disguise the events were proving insufficient against the meticulous work of law enforcement. Even small details drew attention. Receipts and digital records were analyzed, phone logs examined, and timestamps cross-referenced with witnesses who had been nearby. Each piece of evidence built a timeline that increasingly contradicted Rohan's composed exterior. The quiet tension he had relied on to conceal his actions was eroding, replaced by a growing realization that the truth could not remain hidden. Every movement he made, every word he spoke was scrutinized against the mounting evidence, and the investigators slowly began to connect the dots that Rohan had tried to keep separate. As the hours passed, The apartment became a web of questions and observations. Neighbors who had initially assumed a tragic accident now watched with curiosity and suspicion. Friends and colleagues were questioned, creating a network of information that tightened around Rohan, like an invisible noose. The careful illusion of normalcy he had maintained was beginning to collapse. The life he had tried to protect, the careful planning and the desperate concealment of his actions were all unraveling under the pressure of a relentless investigation. By nightfall, the investigation had gathered momentum, and the reality of Rohan's situation became undeniable. The calm, rational exterior he had maintained was cracking. Every careful decision, every calculated move, had been dissected and analyzed, leaving him exposed. The apartment, once a private domain, had become a stage for truth, a place where betrayal and violence could no longer be hidden. Rohan faced the sobering reality that justice, like a slow-moving shadow, was closing in, and there was no escaping the consequences of the moment that had destroyed the life he had once known. Rohan's world had completely collapsed. The apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a crime scene under the relentless scrutiny of law enforcement. The truth of Anaya's death could no longer be hidden, and the careful facade he had maintained for weeks had crumbled entirely. Handcuffs felt heavy on his wrists as officers led him out into the cold night, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, indifferent to the personal catastrophe unfolding. Neighbors pressed close, their faces filled with shock and disbelief, as whispers spread through the streets. The life he had constructed with so much care, built on trust and shared moments, had been shattered by betrayal, anger, and a single fatal decision. Inside the apartment, investigators continued to piece together the events. Every small detail, every overlooked sign, had contributed to the story that now emerged clearly. Forensic evidence, digital records, and witness accounts converged to form a picture of the fatal encounter that no amount of planning could disguise. The deliberate acts that Rohan had meticulously orchestrated now revealed themselves under the unyielding light of scrutiny. Each step he had taken to conceal the truth only strengthened the case against him, transforming the apartment into a silent witness to the crime that had destroyed both lives. The community, friends, and colleagues struggled to reconcile the image of the man they thought they knew with the reality, a reality his actions. Rohan had been respected, admired even, for his professional success and calm demeanor. Yet beneath the surface, emotions of betrayal and obsession had grown unchecked, culminating in a tragedy that shocked everyone who had known him. The story of the fatal Black Friday unfolded slowly through news reports, neighborhood gossip, and official statements, capturing the attention of those who could not believe that such darkness could exist behind the walls of an ordinary apartment. As the legal proceedings began, Rohan faced not only the consequences of his actions, but also the weight of reflection. He had acted in a moment of rage, consumed by betrayal and despair, yet the repercussions were lifelong. The handcuffs, the courtroom, the endless questioning, these were not just punishments but the manifestation of choices that could never be undone. The life he had dreamed of, the love he had believed in, and the plans for the future were all destroyed in an instant, leaving only regret and a haunting awareness of the irrevocable nature of his decisions. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the personal tragedy that had unfolded within its busy streets. Black Friday continued to roar with energy, shoppers oblivious to the story of betrayal and murder that had taken place just blocks away. The contrast between the bustling world outside and the devastation left behind within the apartment was stark, highlighting the fragile nature of trust and the dangerous consequences when emotions spiral out of control. In the end, the story of Rohan and Anaya became a cautionary tale. The perfect life, once admired and envied, had been built on trust that was shattered in silence and secrecy. Justice had been served in the legal sense, but the emotional and moral consequences lingered, leaving a haunting reminder that betrayal, obsession, and a single moment of irreversible action could destroy lives in ways that no one could repair. The Black Friday that had begun as a day of commerce and celebration ended in tragedy, marking the final chapter of a story defined by love, deceit, and the heavy price of human error.